Okay, so this we're talking about Synth Basics this week and today. And today we're going to get started with real basics of synthesizers, and then tomorrow and the next days we're going to talk about modular synths and we're going to talk about reactor. So today is going to be all just about basics of synthesizers. And in order to talk about this properly, we have a in order to talk about this properly, it's better if we all are on the same page with this stuff. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to take you through which synth I recommend that you download if you don't have anything. If you do have some synthesizers, we can also talk a little bit about which ones might be really good. But this is a good one to have. It's a good one to have anyway, even if you have a few synthesizers. But this one's a good one to have, especially if you don't have anything. If you haven't paid for any third-party synthesizers, this is a really good free one. So this is from Yuhei, or Yuhei. I don't know how you pronounce that, but I'm going to say Yuhei, and .com. So if you go to yuhei.com, if you go there to their landing site here, just yuhei.com, and on here, this is a company that makes really, really famous synthesizers. Their famous one is called Zebra. If we go here, look at the page. Oh, hey, Satori, how you doing? So here, if you go look at their main page, they're famous. They've got two really, really famous ones. That's Zebra 2 and Diva. And Zebra 2 is kind of it's an all-around synthesizer. You can use it for all sorts of stuff. I actually don't have it. I've never owned it, but everything I've read about it is just really fantastic. It's used for all sorts of like film soundtracks and like music production, like pop music production, stuff like that. Really, really famous. Diva is kind of the go-to synthesizer for analog modeling. You've got, on the one hand, you've got Arturia stuff, which models a whole bunch of synthesizers all across the spectrum, and they model on specific synths, and they actually for some of them they actually have the rights to use the real names. But Diva is one that I think people generally look at as, I don't know if this is, I think it has like a better sound for emulating the analog like Moog, Juno, like Roland synthesizers, the Korg synthesizers. It has just like a really, really amazing sound. And we could talk about this a little bit later if you want to go into Diva. I love Diva. I use Diva all the time. It's really, really great. Then they've got some other stuff down here that I don't really know that well, like Hive, Repro, Bazil, Ace. I don't really use these very much. One of the ones that I do use a lot, though, or at least I like to teach from it, is this Tyrell N6. And this is the one that I recommend grabbing. And we can talk about maybe Beat Zill. This is actually one I haven't really messed around with much at all. Or Bazil. I'll have to check these out because these are also free. But this Tyrell N6 is the one that I want to go to right now. It sounds really good. It's free. It's got a lot of like capabilities without being too confusing. So this is the one that I think if you haven't gotten it, and if you need another synth in your arsenal, or if you just want something else, this is a really good one to have. So we're going to scroll down here. So first of all, you go to yuhei.com. You can do in /products, or if you just go to yuhei.com, just click on products. It'll take you to this page. And then go down here and go to the Tyrell N6. Podolsky. Okay. Yeah, I'll check that one out later. Thanks, Barb. Awesome. Yeah. So I'll check that one out later. There are a ton of free synthesizers, and I'm not saying this is the best one. This is just the one that I'm going to be using today. So this one here, Tyrell N6, classic synth. Let's just take a look at this real quick so we can just see kind of what we're getting into here. And this is going to tie into our notes and stuff today. So down here, this part right here, let me just zoom in on this so we can see a little bit better. It says it's a virtual analog synth with classic architecture plus extras. Now, what does this mean? What this means is that virtual analog, what that means is that it's a digital synthesizer that's recreating an analog sound. So analog synthesizers and digital synthesizers are very different in how they create the sound. So first of all, let's talk about this word synthesizer. A synthesizer is anything that creates the sound internally, as opposed to a sampler, which we're going to talk about next week. A sampler is anything that creates the sound using recordings of sound. So a sampler, I'm going to go and I'm going to record something from the world, whether it's a piano or like a car or something like that. A sampler, I'm going to record the sound, and I'm going to use that recording as my basis to play music. So I can take that sound, I can put it on a key, and I can play that sound. And I'm playing a pre-recorded sound. A synthesizer, there is no sound initially. It's going to create the sound. When I hit the key or I trigger it somehow, it's going to create the sound right then and there. Analog synthesizers, anything from like 1970s and prior, those are analog synthesizers for the most part. There were a few sampling type machines like the Mellotron, the Optigon, stuff like that, but they are kind of more the exception than the rule. So before like late 1970s, the 80s is really when digital synthesizers became more prevalent because the technology became more accessible. So before that, it was all analog synthesizers. And analog synthesizers, they are using electricity to create the sound. The oscillators are using electricity to turn that into waveforms. They're turning the electricity into waveforms and using that to create the sound. So you could do a lot of really cool things with them, but they were also kind of limited in what they could do. But the sound had a vibe to it. It had a certain kind of tone and color to it that was really hard to emulate later on with digital synthesizers. So that's analog synthesizers. Digital synthesizers use math to create the sound. They're using math. They're using programming, ones and zeros, code, stuff like that. That's all how they're using to create the sound. So the sound is created based on a code that a programmer writes. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the synthesizer, you may want a digital synth that uses like granular synthesis, or it's using FM synthesis, or wavetable synthesis. These are not analog models. Analog modeling, virtual analog, means that it is trying to recreate the sound of an analog synthesizer, but it's doing it digitally. It means they've used code to try to recreate the sound of a digital synth. Of an analog synthesizer. Okay, so digital stuff would be wavetable, granular, FM. That's like digital synthesizer. Additive synthesis is digital. Analog synthesizers are using electricity to make that, and they're based off of like basic waveforms. Okay, so that's what this means. Virtual analog here is with the classic architecture. Basically means that when you're using this, it's going to have this kind of, if you're used to a Moog, or you're used to an old Korg, or you're used to an old Roland machine, anything from like the 70s and prior, and there's also modern ones, which we're going to talk about later on as well. But any of these kind of classic architecture, that means if you see that, it basically means you're going to already kind of have an idea of how it works if you know how to use old analog machines. So this has two oscillators. It's got noise and it's got a ring modulator. We're going to talk about what all that means in a second. It's got two LFOs with 8 waveforms, and it's host syncable. It can sync into your clock. It's got an audio source mixer with authentic overdrive and filter feedback. You've got twin filter, which is related to Diva, which is related to an older Diva. It says early model here. Diva they update Diva. They don't update Tyrell N6. Tyrell N6 is from like 2011 or something like that. So it's not the newest filters from Diva, but it still sounds pretty good because the first edition of Diva still sounded really good. It's got an analog type ADSR envelopes, loopable or LFO triggered, which is pretty cool here. This ADSR envelope is something that all synthesizers have, but they're not all loopable and they're not all LFO triggered. It's got a skinnable UI, which means that you can change the UI, which is the user interface, so you can make it look different if you want to. You can download different ones. And it comes with over 580 factory presets, so you've got something to get started with. And that's all right here. This is the whole thing right here, okay? So let's take this and tie this into our kind of our lesson for today. Okay, so let's break this stuff down so we know what we're working with. So what I'm going to do is once you download this, the way you download, you just go down here. It's going to take you to another website because they're actually, the download page is not here. It says, where does it say? Yeah, it says over here, to download Tyrell N6, go to the Amazon Tyrell N6 V3 page and scroll down until you see the Mac OS, Windows, and Linux links. The reason why it says this is because when you land on this page, you're going to notice that this is all in German. It's a German page. It's from a German magazine. And so the best way to get this is go down here where you can see the links here. And you can download these here. You can just click on this link and it will download it here. Definitely you want to get the latest one, which is 64-bit Catalina Ready right here. And this works with the newer computers. It works on my M1 Mac. It works in what's the OS called now? I forget what the OS is called. No, not you. About this Mac. What are we running? Oh, Big Sur, yeah. It works on Big Sur. I've got the latest OS. I've got the latest M1 chip. It works fine. So you can download that version. It's with no problems. So as a reminder, if you are not seeing your plugins in Ableton Live, you need to turn on your audio units and your VSTs. So you need to go up here to live preferences, turn on your preferences here, and in here, go into your plugins and make sure that your audio units and your VST2, VST3, if you want to use them, are all turned on. This is for a Mac. On Windows, it'll say VST2. It will not say audio units. Okay, so make sure those are on. Otherwise, you're not going to see this Tyrell N6. Okay. All right, so once that stuff is on, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to go into my plugins. I'm going to go to my VST folders and go into my UHEI. And here is the Tyrell N6. Boom. Right there. There we go. And so it's inside here. All right, so there it is. And it looks like it just did on the thing. And in here, we're going to talk about all that's going on in here. And we're going to use this to talk about our oscillators and mixers and filters, all that good stuff, LFOs, all the things, okay? So this is like, hopefully you can download this and install it, and then you can, like, you know, go through this when I go through this stuff. Okay, cool. Let's go over to here. Awesome. So Synth Basics. So basic introduction to synthesis, and this is also going to apply to our samplers as well next week. So in general, there are two things that really help us to identify sounds. If we break sounds down, if I said to you, make me a piano sound, okay? Well, two things that would help us to identify what is a piano, what is a snare drum, what is a violin, what is a harp, what is a French horn, these things. The first thing is the envelope. The envelope is the shape of the sound's loudness. When I say the shape, we talk about things in terms of fast and slow, dying off, release, decay. That's describing the envelope, okay? So that's the shape of the sound's loudness. And the envelope, here, let me just skip over here. It looks like this. This is what an envelope kind of looks like in really, really basic terms. But this is like the diagram that people use to describe an envelope. So we have a couple words here. We have attack, we have decay, sustain, and release. That's our envelope. And the envelope is how one of the things we can use to identify the sound. So for example, if I said, what does a piano sound like? Well, you could say it has a fast attack. Bum, and it kind of dies off over time. So it's got a fast attack and a really slow release. And you can play a piano short or long, but if you hold a piano down, bum, it's always going to be dying out. It's always going to be moving towards silence. Okay, so that's what we would call a long release or a long decay. If you let go, it's what happens to the piano is a hammer comes, the hammer hits it, and then there's like this like a felt piece that lays down on top of it to dampen the string. So you can play it short and it will stop quickly. It would have a fast release, or if you hold it down, it's going to have a long over time kind of decay. Pianos actually don't have a real sustain. If you hold the note down, it's constantly moving towards silence. That's because it's a string. It's an acoustic instrument. It's a string that's vibrating, and strings do not vibrate forever. So if you think about a piano, it starts quickly and then dies out over time. Same thing with a guitar. A guitar starts quickly and then dies out over time. When I pluck a string on a guitar, bing, it starts quickly and dies out over time. And I just realized I don't have my hard drive plugged in right now. So, but my point is that they both kind of have the same envelope. They both start quick and die out over time. Okay. The difference between a piano and a guitar and why we can hear they sound different is because a piano is struck, the string is struck by a hammer that has felt on it. And that gives it kind of a softer tone. Whereas a guitar, we're going to pick it with a pick, which is a hard piece of plastic or metal, or we're going to hit it with our hand, our fingers, which is a bit softer, but it's still got that same kind of metallic tone to it. And if you have a nylon guitar, it's going to have a slightly softer tone. A nylon guitar, the strings are actually made out of nylon, and a metal guitar, the strings are made out of metal. So that's the big difference there, is how the string is set to vibrate. Okay, so with a piano, it's struck with like a felt tip, a felt hammer, and with a guitar, you're picking it with a pick or your fingers. So it's got a harder, more metallic sound than a piano has. Okay, and that's the timbre. The timbre, it's T-I-M-B-R-E, this one right here, timbre, is the brightness or darkness of a sound. And it's defined by the harmonics of the sound. And a lot of things go into this. And I'm not going to go into all the physics of it and everything like that, because it's a bit above, like more deeper than what we need to be going into here. But that's what's really happening. It's talking about the physics of everything. So you have the envelope and you have the timbre. And so the envelope is the shape of the sound, how it starts, how it finishes, how long it plays for. And the timbre is how bright it is. Is it like a type of sound or an oh type of sound, like that kind of thing. If you think about a cymbal, a cymbal is like a very bright, mostly noise type of sound. Whereas like a triangle, even though they have the same envelope, a triangle is like a bing. It's got a note because of the way the triangle bar resonates. So all these things really go into it. They're all very, very important. But this is what creates this is how we identify the sound, is the envelope and the timbre. The types of synthesis, again, analog and digital. Analog uses electricity to make sound, and digital uses math to make sound. Don't be confused. And a synthesizer on your computer, even if it says analog modeled or virtual analog, it's not actual analog. It sounds very different than an actual analog synth. Even though they sound similar, it's still got different properties. And digital synthesizers can sound very, very close, and people who don't know the difference can be totally confused and like totally, they won't be able to tell the difference. And even people who do know the difference, if you do enough shaping of the sound, like with effects, if you affect the sound enough, you can get it sounding very, very, very good. But the analog synthesizers definitely have a different feel, especially when you're playing them. It's just easier to get a big, nice, fat sound out of an actual analog synth. They're also more fun to play because they've got knobs and stuff on them usually. So there's other differences as well going into it, but that's where we are with that. Okay, so In a synthesizer, we have three main parts of a synthesizer. We have the oscillator, the filter, and the amplifier. Let me just show you where these things are over here. We have the oscillator right here. We have the filter right here. And the amplifier in this one really is your output here. And that's controlling how loud or soft it is. There's the envelope here says VCA. This envelope here is automatically controlling the amplifier here. So the amplifier is not the VCA, that's your envelope down here, but this is what's controlling it to happen. The amplifier is actually right here, and if I turn this down, the amplifier is turning all the way down, and I can turn it up to make it louder or softer. But we want to be able to control that, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. We'll come back to that and talk about that control portion there a little bit later. But that's our amplifier. In synthesizers, the amplifier doesn't always look like something. It might just look like this knob right here. There's not always a thing that's like, this is the amplifier type of thing. It's not always there. So you have to be a little bit, noticing that kind of stuff with synthesizers. Sometimes there is something that says amplifier, but oftentimes there's not something that says amplifier. So the oscillator right here and the filter right here and then our amplifier right here. How this is connected up internally within the synthesizer is like this. The oscillator goes into the filter, goes into the amplifier, and that goes to the outside world. Our speakers, our mixer, our program like this, something like that. The oscillator is what creates the sound. This is what actually creates the sound. The filter shapes the harmonic frequencies of the sound. So that's in here, and it makes the sound brighter or darker. And the amplifier shapes the loudness of the sound with some help. Okay, so the oscillator goes into the filter, goes into the amplifier. And let's break those down even further. Okay, so the oscillator uses waveforms to create the sound. And you've probably seen about these waveforms. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down oscillator 2 and just turn up oscillator 1 so we can hear that very clearly. And right over here are the different shapes that we've got. So let me turn this knob here, and you can see they're just pictures in here. So this one here is a triangle wave. Well, I guess it's like a sine wave type of thing, going into a triangle wave, going into a sawtooth wave, going into a square wave over here. Okay, so if I play this, yeah, so that's the sine wave, goes into a triangle wave, goes into a sawtooth wave, goes into a square wave, and yeah, I'm not really sure what the shape is, like how you change the shape on this one here. Actually, I don't remember that part with this one, but that's, and you can hear how they kind of morph between the different waveforms. Okay, yeah, they morph between the different waveforms. Some synthesizers morph between the different waveforms, some don't. So it's really case by case. But all of these analog modeled synthesizers, these kind of synthesizers that are based on the older technology, all have these kinds of waveforms here. They have a sine wave, a triangle wave, a sawtooth wave, and a square wave. They don't all have the sine wave necessarily. Some of them actually only go down to a triangle wave, and then you actually back off those harmonics using a filter. But a lot of them do have the sine wave there. It really depends, and that's kind of like these little differences are how, are what makes different synthesizers different. Like all analog synthesizers are not created equal. They're all a little bit different. And that's why you would get, like, why you might buy a Moog Model D, and you also might buy an MS-20. On the surface-ish, they're relatively the same. They're all subtractive synthesizers based on a similar kind of architecture and technology. But the parts within that are very, very different. Okay, so if we go back over here, let's look at these different types of waveforms. And you'll see the reason why it's a little bit confusing here on this picture is because sine waves are usually drawn like this with a curve, and triangle waves are usually drawn like this with more pointy bits. They've got this one here drawn with the pointy bits, even though when you listen to it, it is a sine wave. That's what a sine wave sounds like. And if you remember back to Mod 1, you'll remember that a sine wave is that's your basic harmonic there. That's the building block of all of your sounds, really. The building block of all sounds is really sine waves. And sine waves is the absolute most pure harmonic there. So this is what a sine wave looks like. This is what a triangle wave looks like. This is what a square wave looks like, and a sawtooth wave. And I don't really want to get into the kind of math and everything behind these. Really, it's just these shapes can like once you learn these shapes, you'll recognize like, oh, that's what it's going to sound like. If I see this shape on a piece of paper, I automatically know what it's going to sound like in my head, just because I've been doing this for such a long time. Down here you have noise, and the noise is like basically all the frequencies. Now over here I've got this drawn here. It says less harmonics down to more harmonics. The sine wave, these kind of go through your harmonic frequencies here like this, from less to more. Basically what this means is when you have a sine wave here, it's going to have a darker tone. When you get all the way over to noise, it's going to have all the frequencies in there. So let's just take a listen to what that sounds like. Let's go to this one here. So I got this here, and as I pull this through, you can hear that kind of brightness creeping into the sound. Okay. Hear how there's no brightness in this tone at all. It's just a pure sine wave. Okay, there's no harmonics in a sine wave. A sine wave is literally just the base frequency. Okay, but if I pull this up, we can see more of these harmonics come in. And actually, here, let me show you. We can actually watch this happening here. Let's go into Audio Effects, Utilities, Spectrum. I want to see it bigger. Here, I'm going to use, instead of Spectrum, I'm actually going to use the EQ. I'm just going to turn off all the EQ stuff so I can pop it up. If you want to see your frequencies really well, you can pop this up like this. I'm going to put that over there like that. There we go. So you'll see all the frequencies. I'm just going to turn off all of these. There we go. So if I do this, so we can see over here, it's just the one frequency. It's just a pure one here. Let me put this into mono mode. Mono, there we go. Okay. It's just one frequency there. If I pull this into my triangle wave here, you'll see over here these other frequencies start to pop up. See that? Immediately, you see these other frequencies start to pop up. And this is a triangle wave. Right? You see these other frequencies pop up. Now, the thing is with this, these actually are on, there's like math to how these frequencies come in. It's basically like you have an octave, and you can see this here. So see, this one here is 130, something like that. This one here is it's like 2 octaves up or something like that, or 1 octave up. And then here is like another octave up, and then here's like a half octave, and then like it goes up by like steps. There's like a math to it, which you don't really, I mean, for making music, you don't need to know what that math is. If you want to get super deep into it, you really want to learn how to make these things, then you do need to know what that math is. But just for making beats and producing fire tunes, you don't need to know that math. You just need to know a sine wave is like that, and a triangle wave is like this. Now we get into our sawtooth wave. and you start to see how more of these frequencies come up. Right? And then we go over to our square wave. And a square wave, what it does is it really shifts those frequencies over. So you see that? There's the sawtooth wave. It has actually more frequencies, and we drop down to get that square wave. For me, I think this stuff is super cool. It's really interesting to see that. When I first learned about that stuff, I was like, wow, that's really cool. But in reality, does it really affect the music that you make to see this? Not necessarily, but you do have to understand a little bit about what's happening. So for example, if I want to make like an 808 kind of bass sound, I'm not going to use a square wave or a sawtooth wave, because that's just not how those things are made. I'm going to use a sine wave to get a big fire bass, like a bass tone, or I could use a triangle wave if I want to have a little bit of character, you know, into it. All right, there's more that goes into it. It's not just a sine wave or a triangle wave. There's a lot more that goes into it, but that comes from effects usually, not just from the synth itself. Usually running it through effects and stuff. So that's basically our oscillators here. We got the shape over here. Now you'll notice that there's nothing that says noise in here, right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to our mixer, and the mixer is literally just a mixer. If I want to hear something more, I can dial it in. So you can see here there's shape 1, shape 2. That's our two oscillators. In this case, we have two things that are making sound, and I can mix those in by pulling this up here. Now with the Tyrell in 6, a little goes a long way. So you can hear I'm pulling this up. I can change this one, get a little bit of a different tone, and I can tune this one. Right? So you can hear both of those notes playing. This is not considered a chord. If I'm in mono mode, mono versus poly, poly means multiple, mono means one. If I'm in mono mode, what this is talking about is it's talking about how many keys I can play on the keyboard. So for example, if I turn this oscillator all the way down, so we're just hearing the original one, let me turn that up there. If I put this in poly mode here, I can play chord. You know, like that. Okay, some chords. If I'm in mono mode, I cannot play chords. Right? But I can make the synth kind of play kind of chord sounds. There we go. Change this. Okay. So this one here is now it's playing two oscillators that are tuned off from each other, but I still cannot play chords on my keyboard. That's just, you can't do that. So I got that there. Let me turn this tuning down so we have the same one. So you can see how these oscillators work here. I can turn this one down. So you have that there. Now, what we can also see if we look at this filter is we can see that there's a thing over here called noise. Let's just go ahead and play that. It's literally just noise. I'm playing different keys on my keyboard. It's playing the same pitch. Noise is not pitched. It is just unpitched here. So this here, if I want to make my synth sound a little bit kind of like more, I don't know, gritty or whatever, turn this up. I'll pull it down like that a little bit. So here, if I dial in noise, you can hear there's a little bit of, but the noise is not actually playing different pitches. Just playing the same pitch. There are tricks I can use to kind of change that, but that's more advanced. We're not going to talk about that right now. So I've got my noise here, and I also have a sub oscillator. The sub oscillator is an extra oscillator that you cannot change the waveform of. It's an octave below your main oscillator here. This is something that a lot of synthesizers have, not all of them, but a lot do. It's just a sub oscillator that's just an octave below the first oscillator, and it's set to a certain specific waveform. You can't change the waveform. Different synthesizers use different waveforms. So it really changes the character of the synth depending on what your sub oscillator is. So for example, like a Moog synthesizer, depending on which model of Moog you got. I've got a sub 37 in the studio. The sub 37 is a triangle oscillator, sub oscillator there. The like other ones might be a sine wave sub oscillator. So it really changes the character. This one here, if I just turn that here, let's turn this down. You know, that's like a sawtooth. That's a very bright sub oscillator. It's really bright. I'm surprised that they're using a bright one like that for this, but that's what they're using. So it's going to really change the character of the sound. Okay, and it's literally just an octave below. Okay, so that is our mixer section here. I'm not going to talk about ring modulation and feedback right now because that just gets a little bit more complicated here. We're also going to not talk about these modulation things here yet. We're going to come back and talk about those a little bit later, but not yet. Okay, so we have our two oscillators here. That's what creates the sound. Those two oscillators, it's this mixer here is just mixing how the oscillators, like which one is we're hearing. So if I have like looks like this, I'm only hearing my first oscillator right here. This then feeds into the filter. Now let's go back and talk about that filter. The filter shapes the frequencies of sound by subtracting harmonics out. This is what we call subtractive synthesis, and there are 4 types of filters, and depending on what type of filter you have, it's going to subtract out different frequencies. So we have the low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch. The green represents the frequencies you hear. So just before we get too deep into this here, let's go back over here and just look at this shape of stuff. The oscillator goes into the filter, goes into the amplifier. Okay. So here's our filter. On here, our filter is over here. So the oscillator, in this case, it goes through a mixer. The mixer is just controlling which oscillators we're hearing. That goes into our filter. And the filter is going to subtract out different parts of the sound. So for example, let's go ahead and make a really bright sound. Here's my square wave. If I pull the filter cutoff down, it's going to make that tone darker. And over here on the right-hand side, we're going to see it pulling the frequencies back like this. Watch this. As I pull it down, you can hear it getting darker. You can also see those frequencies dropping off. So if I pull it down enough, it starts to sound more like that sine wave. This sounds like the triangle wave. Okay. And this here is set to a certain frequency. We can see basically where that frequency is. Now, there's a resonance button here as well. Let me just zoom in so you can see that more clearly. This resonance knob, what it does is it puts a peak at that particular place. So, where the cutoff frequency is. So watch this. If I push this up, let me push that up really far and pull this one up. See right here, there's a little spike right there. And it sounds kind of like a whistling sound. If I pull this back, it's not going to be as strong. If I pull it all the way back, hear what that does to the sound? It's poking that one little frequency up louder. Okay, so that's what's happening there. The resonance is poking that frequency up there, and the cutoff is telling it which frequency to poke up. If you want, usually different synthesizers handle their resonance and cutoff differently. So for example, with a Moog synthesizer, some of the Moogs, not all of them, they have a certain kind of filter, and what it does is it actually decreases the bass low frequencies if you push that resonance too hard. Other synthesizers do not do that. So if you're using a Moog synth and you want to get like a really fat bass sound out of a Moog synth, do not put the resonance up. Keep the resonance down all the way. But you can use it for other really cool types of sounds. But like when I first started using this stuff, I didn't really understand all that. And I thought the resonance would be cool for making the bass come out. And I had no idea why my bass was really getting thinner. It really confused me for a while until I realized, oh, that's what's happening. Other synthesizers are different. So this cutoff here is the frequency. We're going to subtract the frequencies. We're going to subtract out. So this here is called a low pass. We got a couple modes in here. We got low pass, high pass. So this one here is low pass mode. The way we change it with the Tyrell N6 is you pull up this fader right here, and it changes to a high pass. And now what we see happening is all of those high frequencies are staying, the low frequencies are getting cut out. Okay, let's just take a look at what that looks like on paper here. So the low pass is letting the low frequencies come through, and the high pass is letting the high frequencies come through here. That's why it's called pass. If it's called cut, it's going to cut those frequencies. So a low cut is what you'd use on a microphone to cut out the low frequencies. A low pass is what you use to let those frequencies pass through. That's how you can kind of like rationalize those two different terms in your head. Low pass is passing them through, low cut is cutting them off. With these filter types for synthesizers, we always use the word pass, low pass, high pass, band pass. But when we're talking about a mixer and you're cutting out those low frequencies, it's going to call it a low cut because it's cutting out the frequencies. I am not really sure why the musicians didn't all just get together and name them the same thing, but they didn't. They named them separate things. So you're just going to have to get used to it. And on some EQs, sometimes it's called a low cut, sometimes it's called a high pass. It's you know, the terminology, just get used to it. It's different in different places. So you just have to deal with that. Then we also have a bandpass and a notch. Now the bandpass in this synthesizer, put this in a bandpass mode, this knob no longer should do anything. You can hear it makes it a little bit brighter, but it doesn't do as much. What this is doing now, this kind of bandpass, is when I'm down low, it's letting the low frequencies come through. When I'm up high, it's letting the high frequencies come through. So it's kind of a chameleon. Okay, that's what the bandpass is doing. What it looks like. Now here, we can actually see these really well. Well, it's not, it's kind of subtle-ish. So see how it's letting the high frequencies come through? It took down those low frequencies. They're still there, kind of, but you just can't hear them. And down here, it cuts out the high frequencies. So, and once again, different filters act differently. That's why it's really useful to have different filters in your collection of effects, because different filters are different, right? So in here, this is the 24 dB. This is the bandpass here, the low pass, high pass. Use this. So if I pull it down, you can see what's going on over there. If I pull it up to high pass mode, it's going to cut out those low frequencies here. Here, let's just take, I'm going to open this filter all the way up. And let's just check out if I put on here the auto filter from Ableton Live. This is the filter that comes with Ableton Live. And this one here has similar type of things going on. We've got our low pass, we've got our high pass, we've got our band pass, we've got a notch, and we've got this kind of morphing low pass, band pass, high pass thing. So you can see it goes through, it morphs to all the different flavors of filters here. And it's a pretty cool thing. It just morphs through everything. But let's not get confused. So this one here is the low pass, and we can hear that it's going to sound a little bit different once I slap this on here. See what happens when I pull the frequency back? Right? See how that sound? Compared to this one, if I'm going to turn this filter off here, let's go back to our filter that comes with the synth. See how it has a very different sound? Okay, so that's why you might want to have different filters to do different things with your sounds. Now, a big difference is that this filter here is tied into my envelopes inside when I hit the key on my keyboard. This filter is not tied into my envelope. With Max for Live, there are ways that you can tie it in, but that's not what we've got going on right here. It's not tied into when I press my keys on my keyboard. So that's a thing that this filter can actually do some very different stuff from this filter here. But as I said, you can get a Max for Live device that will basically enable it to react to your keystroke, to your gate signal from your keyboard. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this one here. I just wanted to show you a little bit about how that sounds different there. So that's basically our filter. Some other things we've got in our filter is we've got the frequency cutoff and we got the resonance peak. The frequency cutoff adjusts where the filter will cut the frequencies, and the resonance is a gain bump at the cutoff point. Then we also have our slope, which determines how quickly the filter cuts off. So if I go over here, our slope is, in this one it's called the poles. And there's three options here. There's 12, there's 24, and there's 36. The more poles it has, it's a harder cutoff. What this means here, this 12 dB, 24 dB, and 36 dB, this is saying that this one here will cut 12 decibels for every octave of frequencies. So the more frequencies the sound has, it's going to cut it by 12 decibels as it goes up those octaves. So 12 is a kind of a gentle slope. 24 is a steeper slope, and 36 is a very steep slope. So what that means is if I'm in my low pass filter mode here, a 12 dB per octave is still going to let a lot of those frequencies through. 24 is going to cut off more, and 36 is going to cut off a lot. So let's check this out. Let's listen to 12. Here's 24. See how it cuts them off more, and then 36. Which, sorry, I'm going to put this down here so I can actually hear that difference. 12, 24, and 36. See how 36 is a lot darker. It's cut off more of those frequencies. 24 is a little bit brighter, and 12 is a good deal brighter. So, and different filters have different poles or slope, however the synth calls it or the filter calls it. Different filters call it different things, but they have different ones. And so, again, depending on what kind of sound you're trying to get, what you're going for, you can use different filters. Here, let's just check this out over here. Let me put my auto filter back in here. I took it out too soon. So here's my auto filter here. If I pull this down, here, let's put this up. Whoops, not you. You. There we go. So here's my original sound. There it is. And my filters on here are right down here. My slope. See that? Here, let's make sure you can see that really well. There we go. So if I put this here at, whatever, 472 hertz, there's my slope. You hear how it's cutting off more stuff, more of those frequencies. It's brighter, it's darker. It's brighter, it's darker. This one only has 2 of these. Let's see, what other filters do I have here? Let's see what I got. I feel like I may have one from Arturia. Filter Mini, what are you? Oh, it's a demo. Oh, why is it not? Okay, I haven't used it yet. Let's activate this. There we go. I don't need to see a tour. Okay, so this here is based on like a mini Moog type of filter. So it's going to sound different still. Let me turn this filter off. So here's my cutoff frequency. There's that, and we can see, does this one have a, let me see, this one here is an LFO, we don't need that. We got a step sequencer off, whoa. So this one actually doesn't have slope on it, doesn't look like it. Oh, but you can hear. It has a drive, but I'm not really hearing that drive much. Okay, it's okay. And then we've got our emphasis here. But you can see with the emphasis on this one, see how it cuts down? Right? So you can hear it's a different sound from all these other sounds. Not sure what that drive, I'm not really hearing that drive much. It's interesting. right? This one has a whole bunch of other bells and whistles in it. It's got this LFO here. It's got a step sequencer, so you can do some cool stuff with it. But we're not going to talk about this. I just want to talk about that frequency, just to show you kind of how different it sounds. What else do I have in here? I have the FabFilter Simplon. This one here is really nice. I like this one. And again, we can see here's my frequency knob. It has 12, 24, and 48. So here. Here, see, you can see how it cuts it out. See how it cuts out even more. And this one has different filter types, different tones for how like this peak works. And I can overdrive it. It's gonna give it distortion, like saturation. But you hear how different it sounds once I change the filter type here. That's a cool sound right there. And this raw one, you can really get some bite by adjusting the input gain and really cranking the input gain on this one. So you can get these really different sounds here, which is really cool by having different filters. This is FabFilter Simplon. It's not expensive. I forget how much the FabFilter Simplon costs. Let's go over there to the website and see. FabFilter, yeah. Let's see, how much does that one cost? Shop. I always forget. Simplon, there it is. 60 bucks. I think it's worth it. But if you want to get into it, maybe you might consider getting like a bundle or something like that, because they have some cool bundles that are good for, like, this comes in the creative bundle. The creative bundle is $379 and it comes with a bunch. Oh, it doesn't actually come with oh, that's interesting. It doesn't come with that one. Let's see. What is this one here? Essentials. That's a great bundle. Okay, so that one actually does it not come in one of the bundles? Ah, interesting. Okay. But it you know, by itself, you can get that FabFilter Simplon for just, oh, you can get the micro if you just need like a mini filter plugin, just like a little mini thing, 34 bucks, and it's got some great little it's got a great little tone to it as well. I don't think I have micro. I don't have that one. And then Filter Shaper 3, I forget what this one is. Okay, I just have the demo of this one here. This one's pretty cool as well. It's got two filters that do like LFOs and stuff like that. Here, let me go to a library in here. Where's the basic? Do they have like a, and here we go, initialized. There we go. Excuse me. So this one here, off, turn on. So I have different choices here. So we can go to this one here, turn on the resonance, make sure there's no resonance. So you can hear what's, you know, it's doing different stuff. And again, I can change different like slopes. You can hear the sound change. And this one has different types of filters as well. So there's that one there and this one here. Here they sound different. And here's the 6 dB one. It's even like lets more of those frequencies through. So different ones here do different things, and we can change, like here's this one here. And then we can overdrive it when you pull up the resonance. Resonance distortion. You got some different options in here. Pretty cool. And if you change the different filter types, it changes the sound a lot. Okay, different filters get more gritty and dirty, as you could hear that FabFilter one got really dirty. There's other ones that I really like. The UAD ones, like the Moog has a couple of UAD has a couple of Moog ones that are fantastic. But I don't have my UAD audio interface connected up right now. All right, so that's our filters. So the oscillator goes into the filter, and really what I want to just impress upon you is just how different these different filter types sound over here. So the oscillator goes into the filter, and then it goes into the amplifier. Now, the amplifier controls the loudness, and the amp is responsible for turning the sound generated by the oscillator on and off. You can technically have a synthesizer with just an oscillator and an amplifier. Basically, old-time ambulances are basically just an oscillator and an amplifier. So they would flip a switch and the oscillator would turn on. It was just like a siren. Now what it's doing is it has some modulation that's creating the pitch to go up and down of the oscillator, and that's why it goes woo, like that. It's just basically just an oscillator and an amplifier. The amplifier, you turn the switch, it cuts on, and it starts making sound. You turn the switch, and it cuts off, it stops making the sound. So that's the most basic of these here. The amplifier, this little picture right here, this diagram that says it's the keyboard, means that the amplifier is often controlled by a keyboard. In this case, our amplifier is definitely controlled by the keyboard. If I press a key, it makes a sound. Okay, when I stop pressing the key, it stops making the sound. And that is the way that it makes the sound is actually shaped by the envelope here, but it's the amplifier that's actually doing all the work. The envelope is connected to the amplifier. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes after the break. But that's basically what our amplifier does. And different amplifiers work differently. Some of them have the knob that's like our maximum output level. Other ones, you're going up from wherever that knob is on the envelope or something like that. So it's really, it's kind of case by case. A lot of times the amp level is the max output level. Anything you do to the sound is subtracted from that max level. Kind of, again, this is, not all synthesizers work like this. A lot of them do work like this, but not all of them work like this. So it's really kind of a case by case thing here. Let me see here. Is there anything else in here we need to talk about? No, I think everything we've covered it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to stop this recording right now.